For more discussion on news closer to home, including the spike in Victoria, Mark. There's been so much discussion about what the states should be doing with their borders, but now this is all being revised given this rise in numbers over recent days out of Melbourne.
Yeah, that's true, Kieran. It's certainly given pause to thought to authorities. Of course, this had always been foreshadowed. The leadership, both political and the health authorities, had always said that it was going to be a slow, a gradual and cautious sort of path out of this lockdown, out of the crisis, and that it wouldn't be without, so-called bumps in the road. It wouldn't be without setbacks. There would be outbreaks. There would be the authorities would attempt to localise those. They would have to perhaps consider local lockdowns rather than locking down the whole national economy or a whole state economy. And that really does seem to be what's happening here. And it's a difficult moment, but in some ways it's also being seen, subject to there being no fatalities, of course, but it's also being seen as a useful reminder for everyone, authorities and population alike, that people need to remain very vigilant, and that even as we come out of this, the virus hasn't gone away and it hasn't been cured. It's not like there's a vaccine there. So we're going to need to be very conscious of it for a long time to come yet.
We're standing by to go to the Chief Health Officer, Brendan Murphy. We'll get there when that starts, that news conference. But in the meantime, let's look at a couple of other issues. First of all, superannuation. This Ginger group, apparently, according to the 9 newspapers within the Liberal Party that don't want the next increase to the super guarantee. Andrew Clennell reports a bit earlier this hour that the Prime Minister's thinking apparently is that's not going to happen. They're not going to change. This is legislated and it's not a fight they need to pick right now, Mark.
Yes, and that's gratifying in a sense, because I don't think the government needs to pick any more fights. It has a very full dance card, notwithstanding that it was elected with a fairly empty agenda. But events have come along, most particularly this COVID crisis that followed the bushfire crisis and the drought and everything else. And there are many things the government needs to be doing now to be protecting the economy and to be, designing the best path out of this, to keep as many people in jobs and to keep the economic fabric of the country together to the greatest extent possible. So having a fight with unions over the superannuation guarantee, I think, it's politically unwise for a start. And it's interesting, there are people in the coalition who'd like that to happen. But, when we hear all this talk about the idea of an accord style reconciliation between the coalition and the Labor movement, you've got to remember that compulsory superannuation, or the superannuation guarantee like this, was designed as a way of deferring wage increases and providing for people's retirement. And as you say, it has been legislated. I think the Prime Minister is very wise to stick to that path and to have that fight, if that fight is to be had, to have it much later, because it's certainly not a first order of business issue.
On the university funding arrangements, as someone who works for one of our largest and, certainly most respected universities, the ANU, what's your view on this when there's a shift in priorities from humanitarian to the humanities subjects to the maths and science subjects?
Well, I think it's sort of a bit regrettable, really, that it's come out the way it has. I heard Tom Connell making the point earlier that it appeared to come pretty much out of the blue, and I think that's right. And, you can understand the government wanting to align educational institutions where possible with the future needs of the economy, and that is really what the educational system has been doing. But to do so at the expense of the humanities, it really does have the feel about it that there's an ideological element to this. There's long been antipathy between the conservative side of politics and the arts side of the academy, if I can put it like that. And this looks like a way of prosecuting further that argument. And it's true. Look, the academy has at times been difficult for governments. Even as recently as a couple of weeks ago, we had the Prime Minister making an erroneous claim that Australia had never had slavery, and of course a number of prominent historians, people from the humanities, stepped forward with the evidence and said, well, that's just not right. And that's the kind of thing I guess the government isn't particularly keen to have happen. I'm not saying this was motivated by that incident, but I think it's a bit of a shame. It's good to see a government having an active look at education, but I think it's got off on the wrong foot with this.
Let's conclude now with a discussion about the United States, and we are now 4 months away from the presidential election, or a bit over that, not much more than 4 months. And Donald Trump, with that rally, he was obviously keen to get back to the rallies. It served him so well in the previous electoral cycle. But this way in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there were some stumbling blocks, either via social media, people, registering and not showing up, or via security, according to other analysis. Either way, just not the sort of kickstart to momentum that he'd like right now.
No, but he hasn't shown any leadership throughout this entire crisis. He's shown a kind of anti-leadership. He's been a part of the problem rather than the part of the solution, and he continues to be. I mean, this has come along during an election year, and Donald Trump has shown that he's incapable of understanding the issue in any other way than through the lens of how it impacts upon his re-election hopes. So this whole idea of resisting the authorities, of getting out there into these mass rallies, of effectively declaring that there's a cultural aspect to coronavirus, and that it's some sort of suggesting that it's some sort of preoccupation of the liberal media and the left somehow. This is the picture he's tried to set up about it. And I think what we've seen is that some of his supporters, well, they'll just brook anything from this president, but a good many of them just didn't show up. And, I don't know what we can't really predict how this is all going to end, but I've been of the view for some time that he won't win this election just because this coronavirus has exposed how utterly hopeless he is.
The other, consideration here, though, Mark, while we see those empty seats and the overflow area not being used and so on, is the impact of this virus on the campaigning of the other candidate, that being Joe Biden, who basically really hasn't got underway yet. I mean, a few hits here and there on social media and so on, but his own campaigning is restricted. I just wonder how that all feeds into the final result when we consider it on the Wednesday after the election day.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, the president's trying to really capitalise on that. We had crooked Hillary Clinton, now we have sleepy Joe Biden. And it's all about Joe Biden being old and in some way docile while the president is out there being active and engaging with his base. And it will be fascinating to see whether that is a factor. It's certainly true that this election campaign is being contested during a very difficult situation where mass gatherings are ill-advised, and Joe Biden has kept a relatively low profile. But if you look at the polls, it's not reflecting negatively on him in those polls. He leads quite considerably by a number of polls I've seen. So whether that changes or not, I guess that remains to be seen. That's what the president's trying to do. But if it turns out that there are infections arising from some of these mass rallies, I guess he'll say that's fake news as well, and some of his supporters will just, regard it as such. But surely he is not expanding his base, and that's actually one of his problems. I think he's not expanding his base.